seen as very important to start any activity, especially with respect to the Dharma or with respect to Buddhism, to start it with a positive motivation. So to take a few moments. Can you not hear me? You can't hear me? Oh, I'll go take a little closer. This works? Okay. So let's take a few moments to set the motivation, to just think that however long you're going to be here, so however long you're going to be here, whether for this session or the remaining sessions or maybe for the entire course, so maybe be able to make the most out of it, be able to listen, be skeptical, be critical, and at the same time be able to utilize it in a way that helps us to live a more meaningful, a happier, and kinder type of life. Okay? All right, so let's think about that for a few moments. Alright, now first I have one question. Who's totally new to Buddhism, has never received a teaching in Buddhism? Okay. Alright, thank you, good, that's good to know. Who's like a total advanced person? Okay, anyways, so what I'm going to do is, as you already know, there is a book that has been translated from English into Hebrew. Gila translated the book. I have it here on the iPad, so allow me to use this. It makes it easier, because I want to go along this book as it's traditionally done. So the way Buddhism is taught, or is introduced, or set forth usually, is by using a text. Why? Because then you can make notes if you want, but that can be disturbing to make notes. But you have always something to refer back to. And of course, also the text we use is by someone who is seen as highly realized, someone who has really got understanding of Buddhism in the sense that not just academic, intellectual understanding, but experience. Like a most amazing practitioner, his home is the Dalai Lama. So then there's a special blessing from using his text, from that he is talking from his own experience. So the idea is that he's talking from his own experience, really living what he's teaching. Plus, you have something to refer to. You can read in advance if you like, or afterwards. Okay. So I don't think I'll be able to do the entire book, because as you've seen, it's 250 pages, and to rush through it without giving you much detail, I don't think is a good idea. So usually it's like if I go through a book, usually I take a book by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, in the course that we do here, the kind of course we do here, and then to divide it into two parts. So let's just see how far we get, because as I said, it's better to go through it thoroughly and then continue next year. Right? Okay, with the rest of the book. All right. And what I've done is I've marked some of the parts that I thought were most relevant and the parts that maybe were more difficult to understand, and just allow me to go through this and then just explain you what His Holiness is talking about. And at the same time, from your side, I would like you to be very, very critical, very skeptical about anything I say. Does it make sense or not? So anything I explain, to always have in the back of your mind, no, right? Can't be, no, right? So that gets you to think in a specific way, like be always analytical, to always kind of reflect, examine whether this makes sense or not. So it has a different effect on the mind. and you maybe don't get bored. You just hear someone talking. But also, what I would like you to do, if you find what is being taught, what is being shared here helpful, I would like you to, as a great Tibetan yogi, I think he was a contemporary of someone called Atisha, so he said that any kind of teaching should be taken as personal instruction or an instruction to practice, which basically doesn't mean you have to become a Buddhist. No, it's got nothing to do with that. It's the idea, how is this relevant to my own life? How is this relevant to me? Is this something I can adopt? Is this something that I could, implement myself in my own life and make my life a better life? And as I just basically implied, well, Buddhism is not about becoming a Buddhist. In fact, it's not encouraged. It's not encouraged, like the Dalai Lama would say. The Dalai Lama always says this. He always says, well, it's not a good idea to become a Buddhist, actually. Unless Buddhism is like the religion you were raised in, just be whoever you are. Like if you're Jewish, you remain Jewish. If you're Muslim, you remain Muslim. If you're Christian, and if you're an atheist, just remain an atheist. You're comfortable with that, and you've made up your mind about that. So it's good to continue doing that, but take bits and pieces that you find helpful, and leave the rest. So again, that's another good reason to be very skeptical, to examine everything, to find out what are the pieces, what are the parts that you find personally helpful, and what is it that you find, no, you don't want to deal with it. But what I would also like you to ask is, when you hear things that previously, and I assume that most of you have a background in Buddhism, that if there was something that previously were like, no way, this does not make sense, to have an open mind for it and still see it as a possibility. So to give it a chance and see whether there's maybe something to it that previously, yes, we held a certain view about something, but to have an open mind, in other words, be unbiased about it. And then if you still go like, okay, that doesn't make sense, fair enough. At least you've given it a try, right? So that's, I think, is really important, to be open-minded, but at the same time to only take what you need and leave the rest. Right? That's the whole point in introducing Buddhism anywhere in the world. Okay. Any questions with regard to that? No. Okay. Anyway, so also with concerning questions, so if you have any questions, if it can wait, then I would rather have it towards the end. Just because sometimes if you have a question, it may be answered as I continue talking. But of course, if it needs clarification, if I've said something that needs to be clarified, then of course, by all means, ask if there's something not clear enough from how I said it. All right, so I guess that should suffice for an introduction. So let's start with the text. One thing about this text is, it's actually, it's an introductory book, but it does go into some kind of heavy details. So be prepared. Okay, so there's some heavy kind of details. But anyway, we'll see. Okay, so Becoming Enlightened. It's a book, of course, by the Dalai Lama, and it has been he worked together with one of his personal translators, Jeffrey Hopkins. I don't know to say anything about him, but he's definitely a very highly accomplished scholar, practitioner. I don't know, I suppose so. But definitely he's written a lot of books, and he's highly respected in the Buddhist community because of his expertise. And it's beautiful, he does these books with His Holiness. He's such an advanced scholar, he can do translations of these really complicated books, and still he sits down with His Holiness, and these are easy for him, but nonetheless, I think he has a beautiful way of expressing the English. If you read the Hebrew, then it would be a translation of his English, but still, there's a kind of introduction by him, but I'm not going to go through that. So if you're interested, you could read that. It tells you a little bit about the book and about His Holiness. Anyway, so His Holiness basically talks about, starts the first chapter, a book about enlightenment. And there already have a problem with the word enlightenment, which is commonly used. but it has like such a different connotation. Like enlightenment is like it doesn't really mean, in Buddhism, enlightenment doesn't really mean enlightenment. I mean, the word they use, sometimes they use the word Buddhahood, becoming a Buddha. And what does it mean to be a Buddha? Buddha means, the word means to be awakened, to awake. Okay, so to awake. The word means to awaken. So, what does it mean to awake? Like we're asleep right now? No, we're awake. But awaken in the sense that the idea is that right now we actually don't lack anything that is necessary to be a Buddha. We actually have everything there. So to be like someone who has overcome any kind of restriction, so a Buddha is someone who is awakened in the sense, someone who has seen things as they really are, and has overcome any kind of suffering, any kind of concern, worry, etc. And someone who is able to help others in the most effective way. Yeah? So I mean, who wouldn't want to be like that? I would like to be like that. You know, it's like no more trouble yourself, no more worry, no more misery, no more concern, no more difficulties. And at the same time, very calm, kind, compassionate, and able to, you know, like how many times did someone come up to you and ask you for advice? And you were thinking, if I could just say the right thing, if I could just tell them with a few words what they need to do, and if they did it, their problem would be solved. I mean, I had that thought many times, even before I heard about Buddhism. Oh, I started earlier, that's why. Ooh, sorry. You're not late, I'm too early. I'm so sorry, I didn't think of that. Okay. So anyway, so Buddha is really someone like that. And Buddhahood, or someone who awakens, it just means we have everything right now to be Buddha. Everything's there. But we have something extra which needs to be removed. So I usually like the example of a flower bud. You know when you have a flower bud with a pretty flower inside? Everything that this flower needs is already inside. It's not like you need to add some color or, I don't know, some texture. You need to kind of open it and add something. No, you don't need to do that. All you need to do, you need to wait until the causes and conditions are ripe. And then the skin, the outside skin of the flower is removed, and then it can unfold. And that's interesting because the English word bud, B-U-D, flower bud, has the same root in Sanskrit than the word Buddha. So they have the same origin. Bud, as in like Buddha. So the flower works quite well. Therefore, it is said that we all have what is called Buddha nature, such as like we can all remove what's extra in our mind. It's all seen as extra. It's all extra. We can all remove that and then bring to fruition this incredible mind, this incredible consciousness we all have. Kind of allow that to unfold and do what it's actually supposed to do. So the state we're in right now is not what we're supposed to be in. It's artificial. We're not using our fullest potential. So Buddhahood, it's like one of my teachers once explained it. When we say we have Buddha nature, it's a bit like when you go to a restaurant and it says outside, well, what kind of dish would you prepare in a restaurant freshly? Give me a name of a dish in Israel that it's not like already prepared. So it needs to be freshly prepared in order to serve it.
Falafel.
Huh?
Falafel.
Falafel. Okay, yeah, falafel in the pita bread with all the... Okay, so it says we have falafel in pita bread with salad. Does that mean they already have it, like right there? It says on the menu. No, they say we have all the ingredients to prepare it already now. Doesn't really mean they have this literally standing there. You wouldn't want to go to a restaurant like that where it's supposed to be like there since morning. No, you want it freshly prepared. But still you say it's there. So it's a bit like that with like we have Buddha nature. It doesn't mean we are already Buddhas, but we have all the ingredients. Everything is there. And all we need to do is remove what's in the way. Okay, so that's what is meant here with enlightenment, or if you want to call it Buddhahood or call it awakening. Okay. Awakening from the sleep of our misperceptions, because everything comes down to not perceiving reality as it really is. That's the only reason we are limited the way we are. Okay? All right. Anyway, so His Holiness starts the text, and allow me, I know it's not a religious kind of course as such, but I use the word His Holiness. I'm just saying the Dalai Lama seems a little odd to me. Of course, he is the Dalai Lama. It's just a sign of respect that I like to use, as in like His Holiness. Anyway, so His Holiness starts the text with like saying, well, the 20th century was terrible. Right? So we've just left behind a time that was just so full of violence and wars, and obviously, two great wars that the 20th century, Germany started. Thank you very much. By the way, just remember. So anyway, such violence, and from there, now we experience a relatively peaceful time. Actually, a very special time if you think about it. I think in many ways, of course, there's also a lot of negative part of the 21st century, but this level of education has risen incredibly. If you go back, 20th century, there were some very well-educated people, but not everyone had the same kind of level of education. Science has made a lot of progress, So scientific understanding, of course, it has also led to pollution, it has led to climate change. Of course, it's, this is just samsara, this is what the Buddhists call the samsaric world. But despite all the negative sides, that there are some great things that happened. And one thing is that with regard to Buddhism in the 21st century, people are ready in a way. For several reasons. One reason is the level of education. Because of the level of education, people are open-minded, much more open-minded than they used to be in the past. If you think 100 years ago, people heard the word Buddhism, like, oh my God. Right? There was not that kind of openness. Plus, science and Buddhism is coming closer. Very interesting, quite interesting. More and more, if you look back at the last 150 years until now, how many of the discoveries, many of the understandings science has found to come closer and closer to Buddhism. Right? So with regard to consciousness, previously, 100 years ago, people thought consciousness was just a result of the brain and it was not important. Consciousness, it was really just brain, and consciousness was less important. So the materialistic science, everything was just material. If I think back of the atrocity happening during the Second World War, for example, with Hitler, that's just materialism. It was just the body. That was the main thing. No real moral understanding of the person. It's just a certain body was seen as better as another body without any reason. And it was just this bizarre idea of just the material, totally forgetting the person, totally forgetting the mind, consciousness, and so forth. So that was a kind of a dark kind of time, I find. But that has changed. Now there's much more emphasis on consciousness. So there's not just the body, there's awareness, there's an experience. So consciousness really, in Buddhism, sometimes Buddhism is called the science of the mind. Because it's all about consciousness. And if there's one thing we can be 100% sure about right now, all of us can be sure of, is that we are conscious. Right? Right now, you're conscious. You're aware. You're aware of what I'm saying. You're aware of the surroundings, everything. And if none of what you perceive right now doesn't exist, maybe it doesn't exist. How do we know? We sit in a room. We don't know 100%. Right? It's just an experience. And each one of us has a totally unique experience of this room. By reason of the fact you sit in different places, sit in a different place, you have different eyes. I usually say that, I don't know whether my blue is your green and my green is your yellow. We all call it the same, but what you actually see may be very different, so I don't know. We can't prove. I can't even prove that you're conscious. For all I know, you could be zombies. I know I'm conscious, but I don't know about everyone else. So the point is, I know I'm conscious. I know I'm experiencing. Whether what I experience is really there, I don't know. But I know that I'm conscious of it. Right? So in the end, we don't know whether... Are you all aware of the movie The Matrix? I don't know whether I'm plugged into a matrix and it just appears. It does so when I dream, right? When I dream, it seems very real. And I experience this, but it doesn't mean it's there. So this idea is very important in Buddhism. Very important. That we know we are conscious. And the rest... And Buddhism doesn't deny physical phenomena, but it's just saying, you don't know 100%. Just because it feels real, well, it feels real in a dream. So consciousness, therefore, has much more of an importance, much more of a reality, if you like, than the physical things around us. So just to keep that in mind. Okay. But the point is nonetheless, so we have this mind, we have this consciousness, science has found this, and there are a lot of understandings now that very much assist Buddhism. As Holmes also speaks about this a little bit further down, how we are fortunate to be at this time to have Buddhism and science because they actually complement each other. For example, what do you find nowadays in modern science, especially in psychology? Mindfulness. Everyone talks of mindfulness. In schools, psychiatrists talk about it. Actually it was introduced by the Buddha. But then, on the other hand, Buddhism has also been very much influenced by science, quantum physics. I know so many Tibetan monks, they don't speak a word of English, but they seem to all be able to say quantum physics. They pronounce it in an interesting way, but they can all say quantum physics. They always cite that. So quantum physics has been very helpful to explain some of the ideas in Buddhism because they very much support Buddhist principles. And so therefore it's been very helpful to use these ideas to explain some of the material experiences better. Okay, anyway. But the point is that this talks about, yes, he starts off with saying the 21st century was such a the 20th century was such a terrible century, and because of lack of caring and love and of so it was just like my people, my this, my that, which led to the most amazing atrocities. Yeah, so there's a lack of care and love and compassion that led to, well, the atrocities of the 20th century, but of course also of the 21st century. So love, care, compassion, already it goes into that direction. So Buddhism is very much concerned with compassion, with care, with love. So do other religions. Yeah, very much. Most religions, most world religions, all the mainstream religions are very much concerned with love, care, compassion, generosity, morality, even though maybe in a kind of limited way, it depends, but those are very important ideas. Okay? But what what's different about Buddhism is the whole reason for why. Why being compassionate, why being loving, why it makes sense. So that's different. Okay? The kind of philosophy behind is slightly different. But the point is nonetheless that love and compassion and so forth, that's what's lacking, and that's actually what really makes us happy. To be kind and loving and compassionate, that is the way to be happy. We can understand that intellectually, but we have an innate sense, and this is an important point I want to mention right from the beginning. We experience a discrepancy. We experience a duality, if you like, or a kind of gap or discrepancy, because there's an intellectual understanding we have of things, and then there's a deeper understanding, and even deeper than just intellectual, and deeper understanding we have of things. Does that make sense? So intellectually we may know, I give you an example, intellectually we know we're not going to live forever. But kind of innately or instinctively it feels, oh no, I'm not going to die anytime soon. I mean, we know intellectually, I could die tomorrow. If I were to ask you, are you 100% certain that you will be alive tomorrow? None of us can say I'm certain, no matter how young you are. A lot of people die when they're very young. So therefore, is it certain that I'm going to be alive tomorrow? No. But innately, I'm planning my life as if, you know, oh, forget about tomorrow. I mean, I'm not going to die anytime soon. I'm too busy. I have a lot of plans and I'm really too busy. I have no time to die. I mean, not that we really think that consciously, but it's like, if I suddenly were in this situation, I have to die, I'm like, no, I got a lot of things to do still. So, you know, if I really was faced by death right now, I think my thought would be like, oh, no, but I planned this and that, and I don't have time. I need to be postponed, right? So you see how there's a gap between what we feel intellectually we think, oh, you know, of course, makes sense. But that's not how we act. So what we do, what we say, what we physically act, how we plan, it all comes from, and this kind of notion here and here, this is very Western. Tibetan don't speak about like the emotional as opposed to the intellectual. That's kind of a very Western way of thinking about it. But basically there is a level of thinking that is more superficial, if you like, the intellectual. And then there's a deeper way of thinking where the emotions come in. It's much deeper, and that really makes us act. That really makes us act. So, therefore, when we learn Buddhism, first it just touches the intellectual, right? That's the only way to access anything. First it's more of an intellectual, kind of superficial type of understanding, but then the art is then to bring it deeper. To bring it deeper such that it touches one on an emotional level. Okay? So, for example, the idea of death is very important. I know it's kind of like, ooh, scary. We don't like to talk about death. It's not mentioned. People don't discuss it really, unless, you know, someone has just passed away. But it's seen like, even when we are with a person who's dying, we may be scared to be with that person. We may like, ooh, that's kind of scary. They're dying. But actually, in Buddhism, death is seen as something amazing, as something wonderful, to think about it every day. It's great. It's not seen as something scary at all. Well, it's going to happen one day, right? And to be reminded of it on a daily basis is seen as wonderful, because then when it happens, you're totally prepared. Right? It's like, it's happening? Oh, it's happening tomorrow? Yeah, actually I was expecting it. That's okay. And then you can be very calm, accepting, right? And just take it as it is, and maybe even enjoy it. And what we hear about near-death experience, I mean, people who actually had a near-death experience and got back, they talk about how enjoyable it was. Have you heard about this? How enjoyable, how wonderful it was, you know? That the experience they had was not scary. So death is only scary because we just see it as an end. But whatever is an end is also a beginning of something new. In fact, our birth was the end of one thing and the beginning of something new. Every day when we go to sleep, it's like a little death. It's like we leave behind the previous day, it will never reoccur, and we experience something new. Right? Every night we go to sleep, we have to leave behind the body we have right now, we have to leave that behind. The situations we experience, we won't experience them again, in a way. Right? Okay, anyway, so the point is here that I'm saying intellectually there's a lot we understand, but it never gets down to a deeper level, such that it can affect us in a very profound way. Yeah? Like another example I gave previously is objectivity. I know it's impossible to have an objective world out there. Scientists have come to see it's impossible to have an objective world. What do you mean? You understand an objective world? How do you understand an objective world without a subjective experiencer? Which scientist has some kind of objective way of looking at things? You can't, right? I mean, we have 5 senses. They're very limited. We perceive more than there is in one way, and then less than there is in another way. We perceive more than there is because we perceive colors which are not out there. We perceive green, which doesn't exist out there. They're just frequencies of light. A piece of music doesn't exist out there. It's just pressure waves in the air. It's not really music. It's something, the coming together of pressure waves in the air, our eardrum, and the part of the brain that is responsible for interpreting or being activated by electrochemical impulses, and then we listen to music. Is this music out there? No, of course it's not. Do other sentient beings perceive it in that way, other than humans? I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, we perceive certain music as really wonderful and soothing and so forth. I've never I've seen a dog going, I don't think they perceive it the same way as we do. Like dogs probably don't. So our perception of reality, it's not actually out there, right? At the same time, we perceive less than there actually is. We don't perceive X-ray, we don't perceive radio waves, we don't perceive infrared light, ultraviolet light. I mean, with regard to the frequencies of light, it's quite narrow. The range of the light we perceive is very narrow. The sounds we perceive, very little. I mean, a dog perceives so much more. The smell, all this, we're quite limited in what we actually perceive. So forget about objective world out there. And still we have an innate sense. Reality is totally objectively over there. And what I perceive, everyone else should perceive. What I think is beautiful, I mean, you listen to Hindi music? Are you kidding me? Right? I mean, when you come to India initially, and then these taxi drivers, there's this loud Hindi music. And if you listen to it for the first time, it's like, oh, wow, oh my God. It's like, how can you listen to this? Right? How can you wear clothes like this? This is ridiculous. Right? How can you dress like that? How can you have a haircut like that? You know, like how we sometimes go through a magazine or we see someone and we go, oh no, how embarrassing. There's a sense that there's a beauty, there's an objective beauty. What we perceive, that's what's beautiful. What we perceive as beautiful, that's objective. My sense of right and wrong, right? My sense of right, that's the way to do it. And if other people don't, there's something wrong with them. So you see, intellectually we know. Now it's just a matter of opinion. It's subjective. What I feel is right and wrong, what I feel is culturally acceptable, etc., that is actually conditioned by where I was grown up, where I was raised, etc. But there's a sense objectively it should be like that for everyone. Right? And that's how disagreements arise. This person is weird. So this sense of like what's right and wrong, etc. So it's just something to recognize how we intellectually know, yeah, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, but still something objectively beautiful. Yeah, so I'm just trying to point out, this is very important, this idea of the intellectual, what we know intellectual. So every time you go, yeah, but I know that, ask yourself what you know, is that something just intellectually or something you live? There is that gap. Okay? Because when you see a contradiction, sometimes you only have to wonder, is the contradiction because, yes, I know this intellectually, but I don't live this. It's just a huge gap. And I just gave you a few examples. It's there all the time. There's all the time. I know that the person who I met yesterday is not exactly the same as today. Right? I mean, how could that person be the same? Their body has changed. How many? 50 trillion cells in the body? They change all the time. So if 50 trillion cells in the body change all the time, there's no body that I can point at and say it's still the same body, because that's what it's made of, has changed. Well, the mind has also changed. Mind changes all the time. New thoughts, new perception, new sensations, and still I hold a grudge. Oh, that's the guy who said this to me last year. I'm not going to look at this guy. I'm not going to look at this guy. Well, wait a minute. That's not the same guy. So I'm still holding a grudge. There's a sense that's the same guy. That's not the same guy. Similar, okay, not the same. That's not the guy who said this to me last year. It's a different person by now. And still, for me, instinctively, it seems they're one. Right? So we hold a grudge. Does that make sense? So this is our innate sense of permanence, of things not changing, of things being static. Innate sense. And again, intellectually I know, yes, everything changes. Innately, no. Innately I feel everything's going to be the same. I want it to be the same, in fact. I don't want it to change. I don't like change. Most people don't really like change. Sometimes, bizarrely, Even the bad things, we don't want them to change. We're attached to our what's the word? Shortcomings. I'm this kind of person. I'm like that. So we kind of keep saying that, and we kind of keep being stuck in that, right? Because we hold on to some permanence. So that's another problem. So we have these expectations of relationships that are always the same, right? They're not always the same. We're like a surfer, wanting the same wave again, and again, just waiting there. You know, a surfer just goes along with the waves, up and down, new wave, you know, like a skillful wave a surfer would just go along. Whatever comes, that's fine, you know. And so, less expectations. You're in a relationship, you try and make it work. You don't always expect it to be like the way it used to be. Well, it's never going to be the way it was initially, right? Just go along with it. Yeah? So to just ride the waves of change, if you like. Well, we don't do that. So the thing is, like, these are all parts we need to check ourselves. When something arises, oh, wait a minute. Why am I feeling unhappy? Why am I not feeling well? Where is there a gap here between what I know intellectually and what I actually feel? Do I feel things are permanent? They should be the same? Do I feel I'm going to live forever? Do I feel there's an objective reality out there? Right? Okay. Anyway. So, but basically I've already said a lot that comes up a little later, never mind. You're already a little bit more prepared. But the point is here that, as I just mentioned, the idea that the most important thing, the one thing we know is consciousness. The one thing we know is the awareness we have, the experience we have. And even though we may believe there's an external world, and we moreover believe that happiness lies within the things around us, that is just another misperception. That happiness does not depend merely on external things. They can be secondary triggers of happiness. But real happiness comes from the mind. We have everything here to be happy. So if happiness, we have this again, intellectually we know, oh, money doesn't make happy. But when we get a raise, a raise in our salary, we go, and if we lose money, we may be depressed for a few days. That's interesting, isn't it? When you lose money, you put it in the bank, or you lend someone money and they don't give it back to you. You know that feeling of like, the feeling of loss? It's it can go on for a few hours, a few days possibly. And then on intellectually I think, well, money doesn't make happy. Wait, there's some contradiction here. Because right now I'm unhappy because I lost money, and when I make money, I feel really happy. For a day or two, right? Until then that becomes boring and, it's okay, never mind, I made money, it's like new problems arise. But can you see that discrepancy? And the sense that innately we have a sense, happiness comes from those things. Happiness comes from having nice people around us. Happiness comes from having certain physical contact. Happiness comes from no rain in Israel. Or rain in Israel, I don't know. Right? There's this sense. Having a nice apartment, having a certain car. And all these things that we want all the time. So we think the happiness really comes from them, that they are in the nature of happiness. Well, if they were, it's very simple. Everyone would have to perceive it as in the nature of happiness, number one. If it was really in the nature of happiness, it had nothing to do with us. So that's how it seems. And number two, the more we had of it, the happier we would get. Right? If you like a certain person and being around nice people would mean happiness, well, if I locked you in a room with this person for a year, one room, you would be happier and happier. Right? You would have to get happier. Or if a certain car, or a certain movie, watching certain movies. Well, if I made you watch the same movie 1,000 times, our happiness should increase, right? Because it makes us happy to watch a movie. But actually, the fact is that whatever object we experience, whatever object makes us happy, there's only a certain degree of it. First of all, in terms of amount, there's only a certain amount we can take. Plus, there's also, in terms of time, there's a limit how long we can do it. I just read about this. They talk about this in the what's it called, the food industry. They talk about a bliss moment. Interesting. I thought that's so Buddhist actually. A bliss moment. Like when you enjoy a cup of coffee, there's an amount of, like if you take cream, there's an amount of cream, it's the exact amount, that is the amount that's right. Too little, it's not delicious. Too much, it's not delicious. So there's an exact amount. So whatever there is, if it was really in the nature of happiness, if cream was in the nature of happiness, the more you had, the more you would add, the better it would be. But we need it in a certain measure. And we can't continuously take it on, because whatever makes us happy, we need to change the object. So that shows happiness does not come from the object. We take a little bit of it for a short time, but then we have to change. In fact, our entire life is governed by that. We have to change all the time. Can't stay with the same object. Can't stay with the same object. Right? It's actually quite difficult. You have to stay so busy. I mean, we can't really have, even a holiday is not really a holiday. You're on the beach, on your back. Then you need to move on your outside, on your bar. Then you need an ice cream. Then you need to in the water, out of the water, sit in the sand, in the water, out the water, right? You know, it's not a vacation. It's like change all the time, because otherwise... So we think being on the beach is in the nature of happiness? Well, stay there for a few years and see what happens. But there's this instinctive sense that gives us happiness, but actually it doesn't. Happiness comes from our own mind. We're too absorbed in the objects outside. I think they can give us happiness. Right? We're terribly dependent on them. That's the worst part. If we knew we could always get what we wanted, it'd probably be all right. Right? Right now, I want a cup of coffee with this much cream, this much sugar. Okay. If I could have it right away, it would be okay. But most of the time, we don't necessarily get what we want, right? When is the break? Let's not talk about coffee anymore. No, when's the break? Okay, it's 10:30, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, does that make sense? So this idea of if we really always got what we wanted, things would be much easier. Anyway, so this is just something His Holiness speaks about before, and His Holiness then starts talking about, well, another idea, besides the fact that happiness comes from within, is the idea of what is the I? And we'll talk about this. What is the I? Who am I? I mean, if it's like going on about I all day long, well, what is that I we're so much, we're so concerned about? Right? I mean, in fact, we're actually slaves to our own I. I mean, we're very much, I want this, I want that. Just the other day, just as I was talking when we were at Anon's place, I was thinking, in Judaism, you don't worship a person, right? In Judaism, you don't worship a person. Is that right? Well, we're not actually good Jews. Because we worship the I. Right? We don't worship anyone else, but we very much worship the self. And one of my teachers, a great meditator in Dharamsala, he was saying, if we were to do for someone else that we do for the I, for a month, after a month he would say, sorry, I can't do this any longer. Right? Any whim there is, any wish, anything like all day long, I need this, I need that. And then right away we go and whatever the I needs, whatever the self needs, right away we try and do it. If we had to do this for another person, we would say, please, can I please take leave? After a month, I don't know, 2 weeks after a month, we would stop. Right? So, okay, we do this for the self, but that self better exist. That self better be there. Because now, for however many years in this lifetime, I've been the slave of the I, so that better be there. Just keep that in mind. Don't tell me that the sense of an I have actually is the wrong sense of an I. Wouldn't that be bizarre, right? Wouldn't that be? Of course, impossible. It feels so real, so it has to be there. But of course, the idea that the I, how it appears to us, actually doesn't exist, and we slave for something that doesn't exist. Very bizarre idea, isn't it? Anyway, that comes. But anyway, so His Holiness here speaks of selflessness, which of course doesn't mean we don't exist. It just means that the I we slave for doesn't exist. But anyway, that's just intellectually so far, okay? I think innately we don't have a sense of that right now. Okay. All right. So this is what Thomas speaks about initially, and also introduces then the idea, okay, there is a certain I that actually doesn't exist because there's dependent arising. Things are dependently existent. Very important idea. Dependent arising, dependent existence. Very beautiful, very effective idea. In fact, in Buddhism, you can summarize Buddhism, and so this is what Thomas here says.